Hi there, I'm Steve Smith, CEO of Airlink, and thank you for joining me for another episode of FLIGHTPATH. Here we aim to highlight innovation, deliver insight, actionable guidance, and lessons in best practice to people working in the humanitarian response and disaster logistics space, all from experienced organizational leaders. My guest today is a Grand Champion pitmaster and former insurance broker. Responding to a tornado that hit near his home in Joplin, Missouri in 2011, he set up a makeshift barbecue feeding station in a car park with a group of fellow barbecue enthusiasts, and so began an extraordinary journey. That journey led to, amongst other things, him being named as a CNN hero in 2017 for his charitable service. And he's also co-founder and CEO of Operation BBQ Relief. Stan Hayes, thanks so much for joining me today and welcome.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Great. I'm really pleased to have a chance to sit down with you today, Stan. Why don't we start by maybe you giving us an introduction to Operation BBQ Relief. Tell us how you started, what you do, and maybe some of the highlights of the journey.
Sure. You sort of hit it on the head there in the introduction. I appreciate that. But yeah, 9 years ago today, the Joplin tornado happened. And that's sort of ironic that we're doing this interview today. But, it was really about back then getting the barbecue world together, if you will, our barbecue family that competed in these barbecue competitions to go out and just band together and help a community. And that's what we did, thinking that we'd go to Joplin for 3 or 4 days, maybe, serve 3,000 or 4,000 meals and feel good that we were able to give back to a community. And about the day 3, we had already served close to probably 2,500, 3,000 meals by the 3rd day. And we realized that there's a gap that exists after a disaster happens. And that gap is, from the time that disaster happens till the time the larger sustaining organizations can get there to help feed, help provide services and everything, people are just sort of left in limbo. And you have groups that are coming out there trying to help. And, as a bunch of barbecue guys that go set up in a parking lot and cook and do things like that, we're sort of uniquely qualified to just come in with limited resources and be able to put out, good hot food. And barbecue is that quintessential comfort food anyway. So if we can help provide a little comfort with a meal, we thought that's what we need to do. And so before we ever left that parking lot in Joplin, we had that decision made that we were going to turn this into a nonprofit. And, 9 years later, we've done 66 different disasters in 26 different states and one international deployment to the Bahamas, as well as working in CV19 right now, utilizing restaurants to help put meals out across, I think we've been in 7 or 8 different states over the last 9 weeks, providing just over 2 million meals for our CV19.
Wow.
So as an organization, we've grown, quite a bit in our abilities to put out food from the days of a few, 10,000 meals to today where, through building sort of that supply chain, if you will, of restaurants and food suppliers, we're really only hamstringed by our ability to make sure the food arrives to the restaurant.
Interesting.
And so, as an organization, we've grown from no employees just 2 years ago to having 15 employees today. And that's 15 full-time employees. So we've seen those jumps, and we're in a time right now with CV19 that I think we're in our next rocket ship, if you will, as far as the way we're growing, and what we're able to do to help people during this time. So for us, Operation BBQ Relief has really expanded from just setting up in a parking lot to now thinking differently about how we do things.
Right.
We do a lot outside of disaster as well. with our military and our veterans and our first responders. And then around the holidays, we do a lot of things with different cities and different communities and feeding the food insecure. So we use those, what I call blue sky days, generally to spend the time, educating. We have a barbecue basic as our educational program where we're teaching military and veterans how to barbecue, and utilizing that for good, for future. So again, it's come a long way in 9 years from, a couple of barbecue grills and guys, coming together to really having, over 10,000 registered volunteers that want to help whenever possible in their neighborhood.
Yeah, it sure has. It sure has. Well, that's great. Well, we know each other, Airlink and Operation BBQ Relief. We've partnered together numerous times over the years, and most recently for the Tennessee tornadoes earlier this year. And I was thinking that two of the sort of the defining characteristics of your deployments are one, volunteers, and two, this mass feeding, mass catering. It strikes me that there are two elements. These two elements are really sort of least suited to the COVID-19 pandemic, and since everything's so marked by social distancing and extreme need for hygiene, so I think this is kind of an interesting thing, right? Maybe you could tell me a little bit about your COVID-19 operations, which I know have been significant for your organization. What sort of difficulties you've experienced, and how you've overcome them.
Yeah. So, you think about it, as you said, we were using Airlink to fly volunteers, to Nashville, where we were set up, and our sites could be as big as a football field, and we happened to be set up at the Titans football field there, and we're putting out 10, 12,000 meals in a day at the height of it from that parking lot, and that takes 75 to 100 volunteers in a day to be able to do that. Well, you think about trying to replicate something like that in the CV-19, like you said, social distancing. We would have had to add, a half dozen more tents to social distance far enough across the parking lot, and we would have taken up much more than the corner of that parking lot that we were taking up at the football stadium. We would have literally had to be, 5-6 times the size, and we would have become very inefficient and, everything that you could imagine. So we had to think about, with all the CDC guidelines for food service and safety that were being recommended around, we're sitting there having to make sure that everything's being sanitized every 30 minutes, that you're changing gloves, that you're wearing masks, that you're doing these things. And as we started looking at this, because we started doing it ourselves. In Kansas City, we started a small operation helping feed some of the homeless in an area where they were bringing them in to help social distance them and everything. And we started looking at this and we said, there's got to be a better way than this, because I have one person get sick or one person have even symptoms at this location, and it'll shut down all the feeding.
Yes.
So we kept coming back to, well, who better to do this than restaurants? And we're like, I was watching a Facebook video from one of my Facebook friends who owns a couple of barbecue restaurants, and he was talking about how he had to, on a Zoom meeting, lay off 2/3 of his staff. And he's like, the worst feeling in the world, not even be able to stand in front of them, have to do it like this on a video, but tell them we're closing and we don't know when we're going to reopen. And that was sort of the aha moment, going, hey, this is an opportunity to maybe, if he's willing, to see if we can get restaurants to do this and do it effectively and efficiently to put these meals out. So our team, in about 5 days, put together a plan from beginning to end and implemented a pilot. And really what we were doing is we're standing up that restaurant that had closed. We're giving the restaurateur the money to help pay the light bill, and such, and bring back employees. So our own little stimulus package, if you will, as well as providing them all the food and supplies needed to put out 2,500 meals a day for 14 days. And, before we even got through 14 days, we basically threw up our hands and said, this is going to work, and it's repeatable. We can do this, whether it's Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, New York, wherever. We can replicate this. And so we started putting it together, started looking for funding, went to all of our supporters, and started getting some support from some different organizations. And so we started putting it out there. Eventually we had, the state of Pennsylvania come to us and said, hey, we need this. Can you help us with this? And we're doing, just in Pennsylvania alone, we're doing 720,000 meals a week for the next few weeks. So it's really, one, I give all the credit to my team, because they're the ones that came up with how we're going to make this work, how we can do it, and what that break-even point was of manageable by the restaurant to be able to do. But when we're moving food all over the country. I mean, some of the food that we're finding, we're having to get from Texas to move to Pennsylvania. And so we're trucking food and everything across the country to make sure that people are being fed, and make sure it's doing it in a price point that, we're not, losing the money that's come in to help cover that. And so it's been a long 8-9 weeks for my team. But at the end of it, I don't think anybody wants to turn back. I think they see this as, one, hopefully this isn't the new norm that we've been going through with masks and everything else, and that we will get back to normal sometime. But now we have another, arrow in the quiver, if you will, of what we could do if needed, whether it's a large disaster or a disaster that's much, widespread like this in the future. We have something that just is added to our programs.
And so the way that you've engaged your volunteers, are you still engaging the volunteers in the same way as you were before, or is this now movement to supporting and building back up the restaurant, sort of the new pivot, the new MO?
So a great question, because we are still utilizing volunteers, but we're utilizing them differently. We're thinking differently and thinking outside the box. We do have some that are on site, just by the nature of the beast of having to have, some people, on site to help move stuff around. The guy who is a volunteer who drives our semi truck, he's like, nah, you know what? I'll do this. So he's been across the country probably twice, so far, and picking up, food in different states and bringing it in and pulling a refrigerated truck behind our semi to make that happen. But the big part is that we've had for the last few years a virtual team that works behind the scenes. And so we've enlisted that. And a lot of our pit masters and our culinary folks that would normally be on the ground doing this are on the phone now, working with that restaurant. A lot of these guys are chefs. They're chef owners of these restaurants. Yeah. And getting them to understand, hey, you're going to do, what's your capacity? What equipment do you have? So we can make sure we're giving you the right proteins and stuff that's going to make you successful, so you can put out those 2,500 meals a day. And and as we're seeing, these restaurants are doing quite well with the program. They're getting the meals out, but they're getting the recognition that we were hoping for as a business in that community, giving back to that community and working with us, Operation BBQ Relief. Now it's a double win, or a triple win, if you will, because not only are they helping the community, they're open, they're bringing back employees. And I think between all of them that we've got going right now, we've probably helped ensure, 250 to 300 people have either been rehired or maintain their job because the restaurant didn't have to close.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of parallels between what you were doing there in terms of your operation in supporting the restaurants, and what Airlink is doing in our own industry for where aviation is fundamentally impacted, but providing a critical service to support the movement of supplies and not so many people these days, but
Sure.
so that's very interesting. One of this is I also sort of credit your ability to pivot there, because a number of our peer organizations, maybe the nature of their businesses or their organization is not about either flying or cooking barbecue and serving barbecue, but a number of volunteer organizations have actually shuttered operations, right?
Yeah.
And are not able to continue. And so I want to sort of commend you guys for doing that. What would you say is some of the sort of the key things that, or what I was going to say is that actually not the key things, but of all those challenges, I had heard that in terms of meals served, your service delivery is at an all-time high. I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I think that again, you founded in 2011, and here we are in 2020. So, can you tell me a little bit about the numbers? Because I think you've had a significant uptick recently, right?
Yeah. So, about 3 or 4 years ago, we hit one of those threshold levels of we had to make changes and we had to do things, and that was bringing on some new equipment and spending some money that we were protecting, type thing, because you never know what's going to happen. At that point, we're running the organization as volunteer, primarily volunteer-based organization, and by committee.
Yeah.
As we continue to grow, we got to a point that we realized, we know how much is going to come off this particular smoker. So if we know we need to do this many meals, or that's the need out there, we just need to have that many smokers, because we can sit there and do the math on, what that's going to take. And as we started building out true programs around that, all it did was continue to, the steam continued. And then, the next watershed moment after that would be Hurricane Harvey, and the media that we got around being in Houston and doing what we did in the community, and CNN heroes, and everything else. So it's just been building blocks. I mean, to the point of me, being the first full-time employee, 21 months ago, I left my corporate job to do this full time. And then it's having somebody there on a day-to-day basis, running the operations and, working to get more sponsors in. It's just incrementally, we've seen that increase. With all of those things and bringing those programs together and really taking more of a programmatic approach rather than, hey, let's jump in our trucks and pull all the trailers and every piece of equipment that we have to a site. That programmatic piece has really made us think differently about how we're going to respond and what we're going to take and who needs to be there. So it made it much easier also. I'm not sure, if this would have happened 2 years ago, how well we could have pivoted into what we're doing right now with the restaurants. We didn't have the suppliers. We didn't have these relationships with so many of the meat companies and everybody that helped line this up to where we could go and do this. What we do is repeatable, but it's hard to go set up 4 mass, locations. I mean, where you're, setting up smokers and everything in a parking lot and replicate that in multiple locations around the country, just because of the cost of equipment that ends up sitting, probably 85% of the year, it's really not being utilized.
Sure.
I mean, so So for us, it just was those incremental steps. It was bringing in the right people, bringing in people with the experience. And in some cases, we lost some people along the way because they didn't like the fact that we were bringing in people, that we were treating this more like a business now than we had before. And so those approaches have really been what's helped us drive us to this level, to be able to have, the team that can sit there and say, hey, let's look at this and see if that's what can make us successful. And it's really, for us, we're doing exactly what our mission is. We're providing the meals that matter to the people that are impacted. So it's just how we're doing it. It has really changed over the last 9 weeks. But it's something that we didn't have before because we couldn't have replicated what we were doing across the entire state of Pennsylvania, and another one in North Carolina, one in South Carolina, one in Nashville, one in Kansas City, one in LA, all at the same time.
Yeah. And where are you in terms of meals? I think you said, or I've heard that you're about to serve your 6 millionth meal. Did you say?
Yeah. So we're on track right now, basically with everything that we know is supposed to be going out and where it's going out, that we will serve our 6 millionth meal since starting as an organization next Thursday in Los Angeles. In fact, we're working with Harbor UCLA Medical Center in Torrance. We're going to go and celebrate the frontline workers. And one of those workers will be the one that gets the 6 millionth meal. But we just want to give back and say, hey, thank you, because right now, when you think of heroes, our first responders and everybody that works at a hospital has become that hero that wasn't that way 10 weeks ago. That's right.
And I think you said almost half of those 6 million have delivered in the last 10 weeks since COVID-19 started, or started in earnest here in the US.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, so I think we're probably all confident that we'll get a handle on COVID-19, and that some sort of level of normal will return. What do you think that means for Operation BBQ Relief? Going forward now, based on what you've learned, your new models, and maybe some thoughts around what the lasting effects of COVID-19 will be.
Yeah. So, we are actively moving back, forward with how we would respond. Let's say if there was a major hurricane this year, or something like that, where we'll social distance a little bit. We're looking at different things that are already out there. Probably 2 months ago, we ordered a couple thousand face masks and different things just in preparation for not today, but for next steps. I mean, disinfectants and things like that we've basically put on order because we know how long that it's taking to get those things to be prepared for that next disaster, because it would be very hard to do like what we're doing with the restaurant relief program after a hurricane, because that's the disarray that happens there is much different. So we've actually been also surveying our volunteers to find out how many of them, how do they feel right now? Would you come and volunteer if there was a crisis and we asked you? And we've got about probably, we probably had about a 60%, response rate, which is huge on any kind of a survey. Yeah. And this was probably about 7-8 weeks ago when we did the first survey, and we're getting ready to do a next one, and of that, it was about 35 to 40% of the people said, I will come. If there's a need, I will come. The majority of them were like, maybe, I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes.
Mm-hmm.
And very few. And I think the few that said no are the ones that fall into the most susceptible group. We have a lot of older retired volunteers that are really some of our backbone of our organization, and and then some of these business owners that normally take time away from their business, are like, I don't know that I can do that right now. So for us, that's a pretty good sign for us to get a good response back on a survey of that number of responses, but to really see that you had that many people that said, yeah, if the needs arise, I'll be there. For us, it's again thinking differently of how we're going to do it, and you might even, we've even started thinking about plexiglass plates in between, different stations and everything to add some social distancing to it. We do know that it's going to probably add a couple of different tables underneath tents. That's just going to expand the tents even more. We normally separate out between our protein side and a vegetable side as they're working in a mass kitchen under, a 40 by 50 tent or 40 by 60 tent. Yeah. So, a large circus tent, to where we'll probably even separate them even further. And so sides will be in one area versus the proteins, so we can just have more space. Yeah. But, the PPE is the biggest side of it. We've got, we got, I don't know how many pallets of gloves and everything donated about 2 years ago. And if you would have asked me, what the heck are you going to do with all these 6 weeks ago? 6 months ago, I was like, I don't know. We're storing all this. We got them stuffed everywhere. And now we've been blessed because we have them, that we don't have to worry about that. But we've also been able to help out some first responders in areas, especially here in Kansas City, where we're based out of, to help some of the smaller communities that didn't have it, so they could have gloves and have some face masks and things like that. We go out to wildfires and everything, so we actually had a few thousand N95 masks because we had been out and working these wildfires in Northern California. So some of it you dumb luck into sometimes, and sure. That's what happened here with several of these things.
Yeah. But I guess either way, that's going to be a long day working in the protective gear in some of the humid conditions and working around the smokers that you guys do. So that's going to be tough. Also, similar to what you're hearing from your volunteers, I think all of the entire NGO, nonprofit sector, whatever area they focus in, are all sort of experiencing that. Not just it's not even volunteer fatigue, right? It's sort of uncertainty, and also experiencing that with their own operations. But I always like to try and end on a positive note. Despite all of the challenges we have and we're seeing for COVID-19, what do you feel optimistic about for the nonprofit sector, could be, and also for your organization specifically?
So yeah, that's a fantastic question, because I think for us, we're on that upswing right now. We are definitely in an opportunity, have taken this opportunity to move to another level. We did our first federal grant through this, and received money to do that to do a lot of that feeding in Pennsylvania. That's something new to us. So we have never taken any kind of federal money or worked in that realm. But again, it comes back to having the people and the programs in place to be able to do that. So for us, I think we're definitely in an upswing, and I think we're going to come through this better than probably 90% of the other NGOs that are out there. For that, We're working with several of the groups that we've partnered with and done different things with before. And it's great to see them also adapting what their model is. My biggest concern are a lot of these after school programs and things like that are, with schools being closed down and with social distancing that they've all been closed. And so, I've been talking to several of my friends that run those organizations to try to see what they're doing. Right now, we're actually feeding families of one of the organizations in LA that was part of my CNN brother and he's been out there, and his whole thing, he's sort of pivoted to trying to help take care of those families that the kids have been part of his program. But I think if nothing else, it as we come out of this, the people are going to remember that, there were so many organizations, and they may not remember all the different names of them, but they're going to have people have great memories. Sometimes they're of the negative and sometimes they're of the positive. And I choose to think that as we come out of this and we start moving forward into what the new normal and getting back to normal is like, they're going to remember that organizations like ours and others were ones out there on the front lines helping. And hopefully that just helps bring back all the organizations. I am fearful that, something like this is going to hurt, a big chunk of nonprofits. And when you look at who really makes impacts out there on a daily basis, we're going to lose some of those probably. But I think in the short term that might happen, but the ones that make it through this are all going to be much stronger. And, the partnerships that we have right now are just getting stronger from this. And, luckily we haven't had to utilize, flights here in the last, 12 weeks. But I don't think that that's going to continue either. I think that that's, based on the projections for this hurricane season, based on some of those things, we're working actively on training right now to ensure our guys don't get out of practice, if you will, of what the processes are.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm quite optimistic, like I said, about all of it, and where I think the future of all NGOs will be. It's just, I wish I had a better timeline on when I thought that was going to, they would start feeling better about that, because that's the tough part right now. Until everybody opens back up and we get past, hopefully there isn't a wave two. That's where my concerns are.
Yeah, understood. Well, good. So I guess probably all of our listeners are wondering maybe the same thing as we're talking to you. It's where can they find the best barbecue sauce?
Oh man, the best barbecue sauce. So the best barbecue sauce goes back to when I was competing a lot, and it is a barbecue sauce actually made in Missouri called Blues Hog. And Blues Hog is it's a small batch producer, but it's probably the base of 75% of everybody that competes. Blues Hog is probably the base sauce that they use, whether it's ribs, pork shoulder, chicken, that's what so anybody that, asks that question, that's what I have to tell them. Now, if you're looking for rubs, we're blessed in that we actually came out with a line of rubs, and they're actually being sold in all the Lowe's stores nationwide right now.
Oh, tremendous.
You can find Operation BBQ Relief. We don't have a sauce, and that's part of that is because there's so many that are so good. It's hard to get in and want to spend that kind of money. But no, I'm sure that somebody will listen to this and have big heartburn over the sauce that I gave. But I know that's that okay. In the barbecue world, that's one of those things. Everybody has their diehard opinion. I'm glad you just didn't ask me what that barbecue was.
Yeah, that's probably not a good thing to say with all of your work with the restaurants here. Well, great. Well, thanks so much, Stan. I think that's all we have time for today. I really want to thank you, Stan, for joining us today, and to thank you and your team at Operation BBQ Relief for your tireless work and dedication to helping communities in crisis. Until our next episode, this is Steve Smith in Washington, D.C., wishing you and your families well. Goodbye.